the next speaker, which is electrophoretic displays. I believe you also need TFT backplanes, right?
That's true.
Yeah, so he's also a potential, he's going to be looking at you guys too. So Harit is going to talk about electrophoretic displays, which was in the first slide that Mike showed, which changes the contrast ratio. It's a different form of technology, but it's useful for high contrast ratio in ambient light. Very different from LCDs and OLEDs. So please come on over and tell us about it.
Thank you, Raj, for the kind introduction. Mike, it seems like you're an Apple ecosystem fan. That's pretty clear. And it seems like you were still a fan when they were making LCDs.
Yeah, I got in trouble for that.
Yeah. So good afternoon. I am going to talk about sunlight readable displays that consume extremely, extremely low power. Through the course of this presentation, maybe I'll start off with explaining a little bit about the technology itself, why we call it ePaper displays, talk a little bit about the benefits that are probably valuable for some of the applications that we're pursuing with this kind of technology, and then maybe end with a lot of examples of real case uses. And maybe that's the best way to showcase the potential of the technology and how it's being used. So how many people here know about e-ink or have heard of e-reader or used an e-reader? So there's a few. If you have not heard of e-paper displays or e-ink, you might have seen it in an e-reader form. Maybe somebody on a plane next to you was reading it, or if you went to a beach, somebody was enjoying their Kindle or one of these e-readers on a nice sunny day outside on the beach. So here's a picture of Amazon Kindle. So we make the black and white display that actually goes in these e-readers. And that's the way most people relate to e-ink if they know of e-ink or e-paper technology. But there's actually a lot more to it for the e-paper display technology. And we consider e-readers just the tip of the iceberg in terms of where all this technology can be utilized. And I'll showcase some of those examples to you today. This slide here, it started off with some of the examples that you see are concepts back in the day when we started, but some of these have already become reality today. So for example, the sign you see is a 6-inch conference room sign, which you can actually stick it anywhere with a magnetic strip. And once you charge it, the battery can last for many months. So for existing infrastructure today to actually drill a power line to retrofit a conference room with a digital signage is quite challenging. And so, and I'll talk more about the power efficiency, but that's another example. Building displays into smart cards is another one that has taken form. This is an example of a phone application where you could actually build a secondary display on the back of the phone where the space is not utilized. And we have some of these examples outside. If you haven't gotten a chance, I'd encourage you to stop by and take a look. And some of these other examples are more inspirational, like this shopping bag. But we're continuing to look at how e-paper technology could bring in unique value and design for some of these applications. And that's the way we look at our display technology, because we're a niche technology, but looking at unique ways of differentiating the products. So as a company, we, as I mentioned, we do a little more than e-readers, and we focus in 6 different areas, and I'll talk about examples of in each of these areas. So mobile and IoT, so we do wearables and secondary displays for the phone. We actually also did a primary display for a Motorola phone. It was called the Moto phone, which was actually launched here in India. This was in 2007, 2008. So, and the one of the key features of that phone was that it had actually 2 antennas. Back in that time, there were very few phones that actually had 2 antennas because they were trying to solve a problem of remote areas where you don't have landlines, and if they can bring in a phone, cell phone technology where people could get access. They wanted a display technology that was very visible during the daylight. And this is almost a decade ago. And we work with them on that. And we're doing some other, I'll talk about some of the other examples. E-readers, I think most people are familiar with that. Architecture, we're also doing some design and architectural elements, and I'll show a couple examples of that. Electronic shelf labels, where you see the price tags in the grocery stores, is another application. We're also doing smart tags where you can build in this displays into luggage tags. So when you go through, checking in your bags, airport security, it actually prints your baggage tag on it. So you don't need to wait in the line to get a printed baggage tag, and you can just drop off your baggage. And a lot of the airlines have now started to use that. And then the last one is digital signage, which is close to my heart, that I'm responsible for, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. E-Ink is very much a global company. E-Ink's parent company, Prime View Incorporated, started off in Hsinchu, Taiwan, and they were one of the first companies in Taiwan to actually have an LCD fab back in the day. E-Ink Corporation was spun off from MIT Media Labs in 1997. And we got acquired by Prime View, and they rebranded the whole company as E-Ink because of the strong branding and the presence of E-Ink into the ePaper world. So we have R&D centers for the imaging film in Massachusetts, Billerica, Massachusetts, US, and then Fremont, California. And then manufacturing facilities in Linkou, Yangzhou for module, and then South Hadley's Western Mass, where we also make imaging film, and then sales centers across different regions. So let me talk a little bit about, before I talk about the examples of how we use the product, a little bit about the technology and how it works. So the core of the technology is what we call this microcapsule, right? Each of these microcapsules contain a clear fluid, so think of it as like an oil. And then within that oil, you have pigment particles, black and white pigment particles, and these are charged pigment particles. And these materials that we use, the pigment particles, were derived from print and paper industry. And that's the reason they're reflective. So when you look at the display technology, it looks just like paper because it is made up of materials that come from the printing industry. So what we have done is by these charges, when we apply a voltage potential across this microcapsule, it enables us to move the particles up and down. So if you have the white particles on the top of the display, you're going to see a white image. And if you move the black particles on the top, you're seeing black color. And traditionally, to produce color, what we have done is used a CFA on top. So you have black and white particles underneath, and you use the CFA on top to produce colors. And I'll talk about how we've progressed on that front. So since most of the materials inside the microcapsules are reflective in nature, you see the look is just like paper. So you see 3 pictures here. The one in the center is a close-up of a paper or print media. And the one on the left is an ePaper display technology. And if you compare those two, it looks quite similar to paper. Okay. And then the one on the right is LCD. And although it's hard to see it on the screen, but you can feel the difference between an ePaper and a printed paper and an LCD technology. So also, since it's reflective, just like paper, when you bring it out in the sunlight, actually it looks better, the contrast looks higher compared to a low lighting condition. So that gives us a display technology and performance that does really well in sunlight or outdoor environments. And India, actually, most of the states, being close to equator, actually gets a lot of sunlight. So looking at applications, especially for outdoors, technology like this could be a great fit in terms of energy efficiency and highly visible in sunlight condition. Wide viewing angles, and then easy on the eyes. We talked about that. Also, one of the unique things that we have incorporated into this technology is when you separate these 2 particles, they are bistable, meaning they will stay in place unless you apply voltage potential again. What it does is you're not consuming power if you're not updating the image. So let's say you display an image on the display, and if you're not changing, you're actually consuming zero, absolutely zero power. And that's the secret behind a low power display. Here's an example of power consumption for a couple of display sizes, so 13.3-inch display and a 32-inch display. So the power consumption for ePaper display is dependent on the image that you're actually putting on, and it depends on whether you're putting a high contrast black and white line next to each other that consumes a little more power than if you're showing content that is similar in contrast against each other. But in any case, the power consumption is pretty low. On a typical 13-inch display, the power consumption is about 0.3 watts. And this is the power consumption of the display itself. So when you're designing a product, you have to consider how you design the power consumption for electronics, because if you don't consider that, you could actually end up designing a product that has very high power consumption, not because of the display, but the electronics. And for a 32-inch, you consume about 0.4 watts of power. And you can see some ranges here. And then in the standby, you're consuming almost zero power, depending on if you're actually looking for some signal from the display and doing some diagnosis, but pretty much a zero power consumption there. And here's a quick comparison of a 32-inch LCD versus an e-ink product in terms of power consumption. The data is a little bit dated, but it's still relevant in terms of comparisons. You're looking at just the display technology, just the display itself, and you're looking at a 1% power consumption compared to a LCD display panel. Even if you add a front light, the front light for ePaper technology can be very, very efficient. So if you've used one of the e-readers, actually now they have the front light on pretty much most of the time, whether you're reading outside or indoors, and still the battery life will last for weeks. Because the light that's going in from the front and getting reflected back, it's a lot more efficient than using a backlight unit where you lose a lot of the light coming through from the front. So even if you use a front light for ePaper display technology, it's a lot more efficient than using sort of a backlight for a LCD technology. So again, this is one of the key benefits of ePaper technology. There's also the green aspect of carbon footprint and how this technology compared to some of the other technologies. That's important in some of the world where there is a regulation for incorporating green aspect for displays and other components within the solution. Talking a little bit about different kinds of imaging films that we have. We talked about microcapsules, and actually lied to you guys because we also have a microcup technology, which was part of one of the companies that we acquired, Cypix. And the concept is very similar. So instead of a microcapsule, which is about the size, 1/3 of the size of a human hair. So if you look at a 6-inch Kindle, it's hard to see to the naked eye, but if you look in the microscope, you're looking at millions of these microcapsules within a 6-inch product, right? So these are really, really tiny. And so we have 2 particle systems where you have black and white, and then we've incorporated a 3rd particle, and there are 2 different colors. There's red and yellow, so that actually allows you to highlight colors. So this is an example of how it's used in retail environment where you want to show sale or discount in red and maybe some other promotions in yellow. And then what we're working on now is commercializing a full color display where you have 4 pigment particles. And one of the questions we get asked is, what's taking so long to actually build a system that has full color? And the challenge is, if you think about what I showed you before, where you have these microcapsules and you have a black and white pigments, and one is positively charged and one is negatively charged. When you have more than 2 particles, how do you create another kind of charge? And that's the challenge, creating more than 2 pigments, right? So that's where the secret sauce is, that we have 4 pigments in here, and we're still able to manipulate it so we can get full color. And this is actually a picture of a 20-inch device that we showcased and announced it at SID last year. So we got the Best in Show award for our, we call it the Advanced Color ePaper product. And we are quite excited about that. That's going to be launching end of next year to be able to bring color. We talked about power and why power is important. And so we look at, for ePaper technology, we look at what are the markets and applications where we can bring in a lot of value to our customers or end users. And here's a couple examples. So the first one is a smart card where you're designing in a large display. And it actually has no battery, because if you can imagine, if you design in a large display like that and you have a battery, the life of that product's not going to be very long. So that's a challenge, and this is a card that can be powered off RF. Another example is a bus stop signage, and this happens to be a signage that was deployed in London for Transport for London. Is the red buses and the bus stops, if you've been to London. And this incorporates three 13.3-inch displays that are powered off a small solar cell on the top. It connects through web services, looking for updates and information, so it's a wireless solution, and the displays were retrofitted into the existing infrastructure. So when you talk about rolling out projects like this, if you can actually retrofit your display technology in the existing infrastructure, it's a much different value proposition versus having to change everything, and especially working with the government and cities to just roll out something that where you have to go dig up the streets is a non-starter, right? And in some parts of the world, you wouldn't believe, like for example in Europe, to dig up the road and to deploy 3 meters of power line costs thousands of euros, right? So which is, the cost is much more than deploying the signage, for example. Another great example is this display. We call it Place and Play. Was launched by Visionect, and they deployed this particular one in Ljubljana in Slovenia, where a 13.3-inch display is showcased at the Intercontinental Hotel at the front lobby, where on a single charge, it would last for a whole year. So the value proposition is pretty unique, because if you put it on the table, you don't want to have wires coming out and being, worrying about connectivity and all that. So if you can install and roll out a solution like that, it is really attractive for the customers. E-readers, we've talked about that, and here's a picture of somebody, enjoying their e-reader outside in bright sunlight environment, and you can see how close it looks to reading on paper. Another application that we're exploring is the digital notepads for note-taking and learning education environments. And we're really excited about this technology, and if you haven't tried this out, there's a couple examples outside. I encourage you to go play with those. This one is a Sony 13.3-inch, which is made out of all plastic. So I know, Mike, you talk about plastic or flexible display. It's not quite flexible, but it's rugged and lightweight, but it's made of all plastic, and a 13.3-inch display or a product is under 350 grams. It's really light, and it's amazing, and it lasts for weeks on a single charge. And this is positioned as electronic document management system, where if you're a lawyer, you read a lot of documents and you're editing a lot of documents, and how do you then keep track of all those changes and connect, and it's a challenge. So that's one example of how a product like this could be used. Another example would be in education sector, where you're taking notes, and till today we feel, and maybe we're biased, is nobody's been able to replace the feel of pen and paper, the human touch factor of when you write on pen and paper. Multiple people are trying. There's some nice solutions out there, but nobody really has been able to replace it. And that's the way we think about it, is how can we bring a new digital version of writing or note-taking with keeping the same feeling of pen and paper. And then for education, environment, you could have all your books on it. You can have your class notes, and students can take notes on top of the teacher's notes. And that could be a tool where you could collaborate in the education environment. So we're excited about a product like this, and we're definitely focused in India, being a huge market for us. And I'll talk about last slide what we would like to do here in India. But So again, and then this one is a product launched by a company called Remarkable, and they had a Kickstarter campaign, and one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns in the history. So these two products are out in the market. Some more example of digital signage. Here's a 32-inch display that was deployed in a museum environment. And this is powered by an NFC card. So when you walk into this Estonia National Museum, you get a NFC card. And basically, you can set preferences like your preferred language. So when you walk up to the sign, you're looking at an exhibit, and you tap the card, it powers the display, and it changes to your preferred language, whatever that happens to be. So there are unique solutions like this that we look at and say how we can bring in our ePaper display technology. And then there's some other examples, like this is Boston City Plaza. We've built in a 32-inch display in the existing historic monument that is there. This is an example of a kiosk in a smart city environment where it's showcasing public information, emergency alerts, some local advertising for the shopkeepers. So again, many examples like that. There's some more examples for bus stop signage that we have deployed across different parts of the world. And there are different size displays, and they're all running off a small solar cell. So again, very, very power efficient. Here's another example. I like this picture a lot because I'm an engineer and scientist by training, and I took this picture from my cell phone. Right, so the marketing people hate it when I show it to them. I'm not going to modify this, and I'm going to use it as is, because it looks better than what some of these people do in Photoshop, right? To make the product look better than what actually it is. But it truly looks remarkable. Jet is a company that's part of Phillips 66, and that's a big oil and gas station operator. And what we have built is these price signs. So there's like 2 displays for each of the price row that is being tiled together. And it's so seamless that from a distance you cannot tell that there's 2 tiles. And this is an evening environment. So you can see, I showed you some pictures of how the technology looks in the daytime. Here, you're looking at low lighting condition when there's a front light build on it. And it actually looks fake. It looks like you're looking at a static sign. And that's the beauty of this sign, and that's what the customer loves about this, because they want their price to be visible from as far as possible, as far as you can see the pole itself. So when we look at our technology, this is another example of how we can add value for our customers. Electronic shelf labels, and this is one of the market that has really taken off with retail growing and changing, and with more dynamic pricing. At the bottom, you see a list of partners that we have globally. We'd like to have more partnerships here locally in India to serve the market here. I think SES Imagotag is now part of BOE, but pretty large partnerships across the world. We've shipped over 100 million tags thus far. A lot of it has gone in Europe because of the labor pricing being a little bit higher than some of the other parts of the world to change in these price tags. An average store has about 30,000 SKUs, right? So imagine if you have to make price change on all those products to go one by one. First, you have to start a campaign to know what prices to change, and then you have to organize it, which price is going to go in which aisle and which shelf, and it's a challenging. And this enables the retailers to actually compete a little bit more with the online pricing today. We talked about mobile, a secondary display, and here's an example of application that is using the surface that is being underutilized, right? So the picture on the left is the front of the display, which is an emissive screen, and then the one on the right shows the back of the phone where there's an ePaper display that is deployed on the back of the phone. So you can have best of both worlds. And actually with no additional drain power, right, on the phone. That's one of the challenges today is you got to go back home and charge your phones every night. If you're adding 2 displays in the screen, that actually becomes challenging now, right? But with this, you can think of applications like if you're going to travel and you want to print your boarding pass, instead of opening the app, you can print it on the back, and it stays there, it stays static. So when you're going through check-in, you don't need to pull it up. It's there, right? Movie tickets, other weather, other news, other information you want to post it in the back, which you could do it without consuming extra power. Some other examples of art and design in terms of how you could use the technology for phone covers and all. Wearables, there's multiple examples. One of the unique technology we have is the flexible technology, where you can see here is a round display where there's a hole that is drilled in the center of the display. And this really enables our customer to create unique designs. So you could have a digital background on the watch and have still analog arms and do creative designs like that. A couple examples of products that have launched is, this is a product launched by FES. It was a Sony group of companies that came out and made this product. This is Y-Things, which was acquired by Nokia. And then this is Sony Band. So again, thin, lightweight, plastic backplane, ultra low power, giving you unique design opportunities, create products that are unique and differentiated. I talked about architecture. Here's a couple examples of what we're doing in the architecture side. You see the moving wall picture on the left, and it's more of aesthetics and arts and design that you can build into the hotel lobbies or museums and part of the architecture. The one on the right is the rental car center in San Diego, which are retrofitted with these black and white displays to make it look like a camouflage. Back in the World War II, they actually did this on the ships. So if you're trying to detect the distance of how far a ship is or a vessel is, you couldn't detect it if it was actually camouflage. So the architect and designer who was thinking about it, he thought of that history and wanted to incorporate that. So if there's a highway right next to it, and if you're passing by that, you feel like the whole building is moving, actually. India effort. India is really important market for us, and where we are is we're really looking for some strong partnerships, value chain where we can. E-Ink is a technology provider, a component provider, so we work closely with partners who build displays and full products, and we're very excited to bring in this technology to India. We have a team that's dedicated and looking at this market and forming partnerships. So we anticipate maybe one of the first products to be coming out here within the next year and a half, but it's an ongoing effort, and I'd like to continue to work together with the whole and build the whole ecosystem here. And some of the applications for us that are in focus here: digital signage, education. So we talked about the eNote and the writing device for learning and education there. And then electronic price tags and e-readers, amongst other things. So that's my last slide. There's a bunch of different kits that are available. People want to learn more about E-Ink technology. This is the best way to learn about it. So that's my last slide.
Thank you.